Hello, and welcome to UnKpopular Opinions, a safe space for fans of BTS and other K-pop groups to ask the tough question, what do I think of this? I'm your host, Ginger Nuna, and today we're taking a look at the K-pop legacy of Melanie Fontana. Is she a clout-chasing colonizer or a savvy businesswoman? Before I fell down the K-pop rabbit hole, I had no idea what a clout chaser was. I quickly learned that a clout chaser is a person who hangs out with or talks about someone who's popular, hoping that that person's popularity will somehow rub off and make them more popular. It definitely isn't a K-pop only concept. I just somehow managed to live under a rock and not know that this was a thing. Pretty much anyone who's worked with BTS in any capacity has been accused of being a clout chaser at one point or another, but there's one Western artist who consistently gets called out by ARMY, and that is Melanie Fontana. The funny thing is, Melanie's worked with a bunch of other K-pop artists, and she's worked with them for almost a decade. BTS wasn't even the first group that she worked with. But it's her time working with BTS that is constantly used as an example by netizens and just keeps coming up. I do want to start by saying that I'm not going to discuss Melanie as a person or any tweets or comments, etc., that she's put out that aren't related to her work with BTS. She has tweeted things that are definitely not okay, and I do understand wanting to use them to see how her experiences and her beliefs have dictated her words and her actions, but this episode isn't about judging her as a person. Really, deep down, this episode isn't even about Melanie. It's about exploring the responses BTS fans have had to one person and how she presents her work with BTS. And would we hold another collaborator to the same standards that we hold her to? Next, I want to get into the concept of chasing clout in general. So here's an example that I saw recently. When I was in college, there was this alt-rock band that really blew up everywhere. Even though only one of their songs made it to the Billboard Top 100, everybody knew who this band was. For like a decade, you couldn't turn on almost any radio station, with the exception of maybe country, without hearing one of their songs. But as happens with all bands ever, their popularity eventually started to wane. Their lead singer went through a super public divorce, and that caused a further dip in popularity. And while millennials and Gen X still loved their stuff for the nostalgia factor, many members of Gen Z didn't know who they were. They might have known some of the songs from oldies radio, but they didn't know who this band was. And then they glommed onto the biggest band in the world. They were hoping to have their careers revitalized by having this collaboration. And it worked. They rode that band's coattails to their first #1 in over 13 years. Now that, dear listeners, is clout chasing. Or is it? Okay, if you haven't figured out by now, I am clearly talking about Coldplay. And we all know Coldplay aren't clout chasers at all. In fact, BTS has often credited Coldplay as their inspiration. The Bangtan Bomb of the two bands meeting is one of my absolute favorites because BTS is usually really well put together. They're seasoned professionals. But when they get around Chris Martin and the rest of Coldplay, they kind of start fangirling. You can see how excited and how nervous they are, and it's super endearing. But on paper, the situation I just described sounds like chasing clout. And the thing is that in the music industry, chasing clout rarely is a thing. I mean, it does happen. I mean, I'm looking at you, Jason Derulo. But usually it's just a business partnership. Most of the time, both parties benefit from the collaboration. In this case, Coldplay got a boost in popularity with the new generation. BTS got to collaborate with their idols, and both groups made it back to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was a win-win-win. So now that I've shared my thoughts on chasing clout in the music biz, let's talk about the reason a lot of you downloaded this episode. Melanie Fontana. I've honestly spent the better part of a year just thinking about ARMY's issues with Melanie, because pretty much every time she releases a new song, the drama just comes up again. So I thought this would be a good time to talk about the woman who someone on Twitter referred to as an opportunistic bitch. Melanie Joy Fontana was born in October 1985 in Connecticut. That's one of the more northeastern states in the United States. Right now, she's known for her songwriting abilities, but she actually started as an aspiring singer. When she was 14, she had a demo that was made entirely of songs that she had written herself. She wasn't living the K-pop trainee life by any means, but she was definitely dedicated to mastering her craft and working towards her goals. So at 18, she moved to New York City and she worked as a demo singer to help pay her bills. The song that kickstarted her songwriting career was Home This Christmas. She wrote that back in 2011 for Justin Bieber. And after that came out, her career just started taking off. She was soon working on songs for artists all over the world. Her first K-pop collaboration was Girls' Generation's Stay Girls in 2013. Even though she continues to work on pop music all over the world, we're going to focus on her K-pop collaborations because this is a K-pop podcast. Some of the groups that she has worked with are AOA, FX, Everglow. She helped co-write Helicopter for CLC, which I just learned about watching Girls Planet 999. Twice. She's written for Luna's most recent album. Well, and of course, she's written for the big hit Big Three, BTS, Tomorrow by Together, and Unhypen. The first time Melanie worked with BTS was not really with BTS. A friend of hers wrote Euphoria, and she helped tinker with some of the lyrics off the record. And when they were working on Euphoria, they thought, well, this song is going to go to a really strong male artist, maybe hopefully someone like Justin Bieber. And it made its way over to BTS, and that's how it became Jungkook's solo for Love Yourself Answer. Because she was not an official writer on the song, BTS's A&R team had to hunt her down to reach out to her. Eventually, they reached out to her through her Instagram and said, hey, we would like to work with you some more. Would you be interested in writing some songs for BTS? And that is how she got involved with writing Boy With Love. As for more recent stuff, her newest song is Twice's Scientist. That is coming out on November 12th. You might be asking, so if Melanie helped write all of these amazing songs, why does Twitter turn into a dumpster fire every time she collaborates with a K-pop artist? So there are two major events that caused the quote-unquote cancellation of Melanie Fontana. The first is how she handled Boy With Love. On April 13th, 2019, Melanie joined BTS on stage for their very first performance on Saturday Night Live. And netizens were all over Twitter giving her so many compliments about her performance, both as a backup singer and as someone who wrote the song. People were really excited about Melanie and her contributions, especially because there haven't been that many women who've worked with BTS in the past. But by the end of June, ARMY had completely changed their mind about her. It all started with an Instagram post Melanie put out. She wrote, over the last 10 years working on music, I've been shit on and been told I'm, quote, just too extra, unquote. I've secured major singles that never came out. I survived a decade of career beatdowns and hard lessons. Even through all of that, I knew one day that I'd see one of my songs do the damn thing. Well, here I am. Here we are in Times Square under a massive screen advertising my work. I made my career happen without the help of anyone except my own pen and my husband, who co-writes with me. Cheers to our baby, Boy With Love, the collaborators who believed in us, and to much more music with our new friends and co-writers, BTS. Also, thank you, Halsey, for trusting in K-pop. Some fans were really upset by this post. They accused Melanie of taking a lot of the credit for the song's success. They thought she was basically implying that she was the main writer of the song. The way I see it is this is a woman who's rejoicing because she's worked incredibly hard on her art for years and it is finally being valued by somebody else. She does acknowledge her co-creators, but she doesn't dwell on them because this post was about her journey and it's on her personal account. So with the success of Boy With Love, Melanie was also flooded with a ton of interview requests. I think it's really important for us to note that she was responding to interview requests from Western publications. Unfortunately, in these global times, this has been conflated to her taking credit from people of color. Should those publications have cared about BTS before? Absolutely. But Melanie's involvement, along with Halsey's and the other Western artists, that was a Trojan horse. Their involvement made Western media care. They didn't interview her about her work with Girls' Generation or FX or AOA because K-pop was still growing at that time and it just wasn't as global. I think we also need to remember that Melanie didn't write any of these articles about herself. Anybody who's read the Harry Potter books knows that you might grant an interview, but that doesn't mean you control the narrative or the final product. Rita Skeeter totally screwed over Harry. I also think that we should ask if Melanie was really taking that credit or were journalists giving her that credit. And I think, to be frank, it really shouldn't be solely Melanie's responsibility to acknowledge how she benefits from collaborating with people of color. This is something that all white people should note. And really, it's our job to use our privilege to be vocal about it. As white K-pop fans, we should absolutely hold people accountable for their racist actions against BTS. But this can sort of turn into a performative allyship. To keep that from happening, we need to stand up for and listen to stories of not just the group, but also other fans who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. This isn't just a BTS issue. This is a whole K-pop issue. When an idol lip syncs the N-word, that's really hurtful. Using religion, especially someone's deities, for aesthetics is not a concept. It's just offensive. Covering a song that's meant as a memorial to the deaths of loved ones and making it about how you miss your fans is a huge misstep. So we shouldn't be just educating reporters. We should also be educating other fans, the idols, and the companies as a whole. And when all else fails, we just need to stop talking and listen. There truly seems to be this fine line between sharing credit and just giving it all away. Melanie really fell out of ARMY's good graces in July 2020. Universal Music Group went to Instagram and posted this. All eyes on songwriter Melanie Joy Fontana, whose recent work on Sweet Night by V from BTS just locked in the #1 spot on iTunes in the most countries in history. Melanie responded with, "Thank you so much for all the support. Love you guys so much." Because she didn't mention her other collaborators, a lot of people took this to mean that, once again, Melanie was taking credit for the entire song. I have a question, though. If a man had given that same response, would he be taken to task for not acknowledging others' contributions? I honestly think that a large chunk of the criticism that Melanie has faced is actually rooted in sexism. And that feels super weird to say because the majority of BTS fans identify as female. But as we've seen with most points in history, women aren't always that nice to each other, especially when sexism is something that's so deep-rooted and subconscious. I want to point out that Melanie is working in a male-dominated industry in a world that was established by the patriarchy. So I can only speak to my experiences as a white American woman in my 30s, but Melanie is also a white American woman in her 30s. So I think that we grew up hearing a lot of the same messages, both from the media and the adults in our lives. We were taught minimize your accomplishments, and when you do have accomplishments, share your success. Newsflash, men don't do that. Maybe more importantly, men aren't expected to do that. When Melanie responded to that post, she was responding to her bosses. So Big Hit hired her to help write the song, but technically she works for Universal Music Group. When your boss congratulates you, you just say thank you. You don't go into a huge list of all the other people who worked with you. It's the boss's job to acknowledge them. It's not your job. And it's funny because the response that pissed Army off the most actually came from Melanie's husband. Lindgren is her husband as well as her writing partner. And after Melanie received all this backlash for UMG's post, where they tagged her, Lindgren went on and responded with, "She and I wrote, in fact, every single word in Sweet Night, by the request of the label and V himself. You have no business harassing Melanie." What I really don't like, though, is when you research the whole Sweet Night debacle, these claims are usually attributed to Melanie, even though she never said it. It's really unfair to hold anyone accountable for the words or actions of somebody else. I also think the jealousy that often accompanies sexism is dictating a lot of the response toward Melanie. I talked about this a little bit in the episode about the sexualization of Unhypen. I mentioned feeling threatened by Britney Spears growing up, even though I didn't know her. Why was I threatened by this woman other than because she was talented and beautiful and had a life that I wanted? And unfortunately, in many Army's heteronormative dreams, any woman who's near BTS is considered a threat. Why do you think their stylists are always wearing shirts that are 5 sizes too big? One of the most mind-boggling overreaches I've ever seen regarding BTS was when Surin had to apologize for writing the word shine in an Instagram post. So she'd recently collaborated with Suga on a song called Wine, since Yoongi, Suga's given name, and Shine are spelled the same way in Hangul. Lots of people just assumed it was a secret code that they were dating. And more recently, we've seen this jealousy pop up with BTS's collaboration with Megan Thee Stallion. When she released her Butter remix, there were a lot of people on Twitter who were really angry because they thought that Megan was too sexual and was really bad for BTS's image. And I just think that's so funny because we want BTS to be sexual. But apparently, people only want BTS to be sexual on stage. When they're off stage, they need to remain as pure and untouched as humanly possible. So relating to Melanie, Melanie is an attractive, objectively talented woman working with men that a lot of people want to sleep with. So it doesn't matter that she's been married and lives all the way on the other side of the world. By being in the same room as the members of BTS, she stepped 1 inch closer towards starring in a BTS fanfic. And if she is the star of that fanfic, that means you aren't. And that can feel really threatening. It's also really sexist to say that a woman shouldn't act a certain way just because another woman is acting differently. This comes up a lot when Army talks about Adora. Up until she left in 2021, Adora was the only female producer at Big Hit Music. And by virtue of being the only woman there, all other women were being held to Adora's standards. And when she was working, Adora was, I would call her a woman of few words. She might have been keeping things private on purpose because she wanted to separate her work and her life. She could have just been really shy. It's also possible she had an NDA that limited what she could say to people about her work, because we need to keep in mind that Adora was a Big Hit employee while Melanie was a contractor. So they had really different contracts, I assume. But whatever the reason, Adora didn't talk that much doesn't really matter. What really matters is that in the eyes of a lot of fans, any woman who was talking more than Adora was talking too much. And it's super hard to match that standard when Adora didn't talk at all. You probably already know this, but language is difficult. As a native English speaker, I usually use the possessive our when the other subject is present or has already been established. So, what I mean is when an interviewer asks Melanie how she feels about her song winning awards or breaking records, it's natural for her to reply with my. And I think this is something most artists do. I do not write my own performance pieces. That's just not a gift that I have. But when I perform in a musical and someone asks me about it, I say, my show is going on. I'm going to my rehearsal. And I'm not trying to discredit the people who wrote the show or the director or anybody else who's in the cast and claim that show for myself. It's just natural in the way that we speak in English to claim something as yours, even when sometimes it belongs to a collective. Would it have been better for Melanie to say our song? Absolutely. But that requires a lot of preparation. That requires media training. I watch a lot of Law and Order SVU, and if life is anything like that, I have been led to believe that even witnesses before a jury practice for those hard questions before they get there. So for Melanie, who's someone who is typically behind the scenes, that's not really in her job description. That is something for people who know that they are going to be interviewed at the drop of a hat. And really, there are people who have media training who still slip up because even though they are stars, they are human and they will make mistakes. For a personal example, in this episode, I explored what was really a difficult and nuanced subject. As a white person, I know that I need to acknowledge my privilege and tread carefully when it comes to discussing race and people calling out someone for being racist. And in fact, if you listen to the last several episodes, you probably realize that this episode is more in line with older episodes. It's a lot more scripted. And that's because knowing the nature of this subject, I didn't feel comfortable putting my off-the-cuff feelings out there. I wanted to make sure that everything I was saying was exactly what I meant. And to do that, that meant writing it out, reading it a million times. I sent what I wrote to Sam to see if she missed anything. And even after that, I know that I'm going to listen to this podcast one day and I might have regrets about what I've said. And I still have blind spots. And that's why I'm really grateful to have listeners who are willing to share their opinions too. What this all comes down to is media literacy. And I urge you to apply that to any interview that you watch or read or social media posts that you come across. When you come across that kind of media, I really want you to think about, is that person someone who's constantly in front of a camera? Are they answering interview questions? Are they often answering interview questions they've already been asked by the 3 previous reporters? Or is it someone whose work largely goes on behind the scenes and goes unnoticed until one day the media just grabs them by the wrist and pulls them on stage? Was the post they put on Instagram meticulously crafted, or was it something shared really quickly in a rush of feelings? To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a quote from Melanie herself. As she said in an Instagram Live, "You're being protective of a person who doesn't know you, a person who may love you, but a person that really doesn't know you and doesn't need your protection." Listeners, we talk a lot about parasocial relationships. You probably could make a Ginger Nuna drinking game with the amount of times we talk about parasocial relationships. But we have to remember there is a huge difference between supporting someone and trying to protect someone we don't know. And by protecting them, we're tearing down someone that we perceive as an enemy. We need to focus on who the real enemies are and hold those people accountable. we shouldn't be wasting our time on perceived slights and reading between the lines. And as always, you need to keep asking, what do I think of this? Listeners, I would love to hear your opinions about clout chasing, about anything K-pop related. You can send your UnKpopular opinions to unkpopularopinionspod@gmail.com. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at UnKpopularPod. There you'll be notified when new episodes are released, and you'll also get some off-the-cuff UnKpopular opinions that don't make it into the show. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to keep questioning.